Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 385. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're honored to have with us the nationally celebrated and acclaimed Vermont author of Some Things Aren't Meant to Be, Peter Cobb.
Thank you,
Peter.
Well, thank you for having me on your show.
Yeah, you're welcome. See, we always prioritize our Vermont authors, and this is your second book that you came out with, but this is your first book you did with Rootstock Publishing?
Correct. My first book was called To Alice, and it was with Touchpoint Press of Arkansas.
What we want to do is first talk about Some Things Aren't Meant to Be. What's the synopsis of the book?
Well, the book is part love story,
Okay.
part coming of age story, part story about dealing with your faith, and it's also a celebration of literature because I throw in a lot of titles that I really like, of books I really like. Basically, we follow a guy named John Gauthier. When we meet him in the first chapter, we see that he is a priest at a small Catholic parish in 1961. And then after that, the very second chapter, we get his backstory. So when I started writing the story, my thought was I was going to write a coming of age story about 5 young 7th graders at a Catholic school in Vermont. After I finished the first chapter, I realized that I was more intrigued by the priest than I was by the boys. So then I asked myself, okay, I'm going to write about a priest. What am I going to write about? So I said, well, let's get into his backstory. And then I did the math and I brought him back to 1929. And from there, I tried to figure out, well, what's his backstory? Why is he a priest? What happened? So several questions dominated my thinking from then on is, did he ever fall in love? Did he have a life beyond being a priest? And the answer is yes. If you read the book, you'll find out he fell in love several times. And also I wanted him to deal with questions of faith. Basically, he and the bishop do a lot of soul searching and why do bad things happen to good people? So he wrestles with that over and over throughout the book. Does he believe in God? Is God fair? Is God just? But it's not done heavy-handedly. I think I really tried to avoid smashing somebody over the head with a hammer. So basically, it's about one man's journey through love and through life to becoming a priest.
Okay. All right. And so I guess that question then for you is like, how do you balance the complex, because you're dealing with a lot of complex themes of love, faith. How do you balance these in personal growth in the novel?
Well, first, when we first meet Gauthier, well, not when we first meet him, when we first meet him on the farm in 1929, he's a bit of a lost soul. He's hiding out from his parents. His parents are rich folks from Connecticut, and his dad owns a construction company that builds skyscrapers. So he doesn't want any of that life. He's seen it tear his father apart. He works constantly. He's never happy. He always wants more, more, and more. So he didn't want this. So he comes to Vermont basically to hide. Remember, 1929. Vermont's pretty rural now. Just think about it in 1929. It was very rural. So he's up here basically hiding from his family. But up here, when he gets up here, he falls in love a couple of times, and both times with the wrong woman. The first time he falls in love up here in Vermont is with his boss's wife. And that's not a really good thing to do. And the fact that you meet him as a priest, that's not going to work out. So I'm not giving away any plot secrets. And then later on, he falls in love with that woman's sister. So he's sticking it with the family, but each case, just the wrong woman at the wrong time. So he does deal with that. And the women fall in love with him too, but they also know that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes family comes first. So the rest of the novel is wrestling with that. And then in the 1930s, through lots of reasons, not the least of which is what's happening in the Depression. And what's happening in his life. At that point, he's left his father's farm and he's left the farm in Vermont and he's back with his father and he's working at the company. And because of the Depression, he's spending his life basically letting people go. And that really kills his insides. He just can't do it. He can't day after day after day letting people go and firing them. And it just eats him alive. And then he decides he's got to do something with his life besides this.
Right. Because that was going to be my next question was how does John Gothier struggle with his faith and unrequited love drive the narrative of the
Well, it
novel?
drives the narrative because even though he's in love with the two women and they're in love with him, all three of them realize this is something. Well, the name of the title of the book, some things just aren't meant to be. Um,
Right.
and he isn't being an evil person. He didn't mean to fall in love, and the woman didn't mean to fall in love with him, but they did. And it's obviously from the beginning that this isn't going to work out. So when he leaves the farm, he then wants trying to find out, what do I do now? What do I do with my life? And that's when he decides that he wants to become a priest. The problem with becoming a priest is what he thought he would do and what he actually does are two different things. He goes into it thinking he might save souls, that he might make people's lives better. But he finds out that the life of a priest isn't much different than the life of anybody with a job. You do the same thing day after day. He deals with a church council that's more interested in putting uh, people in the seats than they are doing what would be God's work. For example, he wants to set up a homeless shelter. I'm sorry, he wants to
Mm,
set up a homeless breakfast at the church twice a week. And that's a great idea, but then the homeless start hanging around the church, and some of the
mm,
church council don't like it. So the mission that they should do and the mission they do isn't necessarily the same. So he has to deal with that too. How do you deal with parishioners who mean well, but really are too insular in what they do? So his life as a priest is a little bit different than he thought it would be. And he also has to deal, he's he's not the principal of the school, but the church runs the school. And he has to deal with these five boys who are kind of difficult. Uh, they're kind of dumb as rocks in some ways, like all 13-year-old boys are. They get in trouble. They do stupid stuff. They're altar boys. I don't know if you grew up Catholic or not, but they go in, they sneak into the church, and they drink the wine, and they fill the bottle up with water, thinking they're going to get away with it. Well, that's kind of dumb. And so he has to deal with the nitty gritty of running a parish, which I think when he
mm.
got into when he became a priest, he thought it would be different than that. He thought it would be a spiritual awakening, when in fact it's a job where you manage things as much as anything
Right.
else.
Right. Uh, so how do you see the themes of some things aren't meant to be resonate with like readers of today?
Well, I think everybody has had that question. Why do bad things happen to good people? I can't
Right.
believe anybody hasn't asked that question. Even in your own family, you'll have people who have a disease or people who die young or whatever. And we all ask that question. At every funeral you go to of someone who's young, it's why did that happen? Why
Mm,
me? And in one point he has a conversation with the bishop where he does ask, why these people? Why? And the bishop says, why not?
right.
You can't ask that question, why me? It's why not me? And so
Right.
they do deal with that. And I hope that it's done in a light-handed matter, way, and not in such that you're dealing with obscure uh, obscure tenets of what the church is all about. They're just dealing with us people. They're sitting around, drinking rum, trying to figure out where they are and how their lives as priests uh, make sense.
Right. Then so because you're dealing with such powerful themes, um, can you what was the most challenging scene or moment to write in the novel?
Well, the most challenging for me was actually getting the religious parts right. Um,
Okay.
because I'm not a priest, obviously. I did grow up a Catholic, but that's far from being a priest. So I had to figure out, how do you do that? What does a priest actually do on a daily basis? I'm going to tell you, the internet has made life for readers a lot easier than it would have been 25, 30 years ago. Because I did some extensive research on uh, on priests, and I went in and I found a whole bunch of essays by priests who doubted, priests who had issues, priests who wondered, why am I here? Why am I a
Mm,
priest? And those essays really helped me write the book. But I should tell you, the priest part of the book is not the majority. The majority of the book, probably 60%, is the love story between John Gothier and the women at the two women. And also there's a lot about farming in the book. Again, I use the internet an amazing amount. Yeah, I had milked the cow before, but I had forgotten. So I had to go in and figure out how to do that. In both cases, both the religious part of the book and the farming part of the book, I knew that no matter what I write, it was probably going to be wrong. So I had a friend whose family ran a farm in Richmond for over 100 years, I think. She read it, made lots and lots of corrections. And my local, I grew up a Catholic, but I attend the Episcopal Church now. And the rector at my church, he read it again, lots of mistakes. So if there are any mistakes remaining, it's my fault, not theirs. I thought I had done everything correctly, but obviously I had some Protestant denominations wrong, how they're thinking. And in the farming, I had the cows in a stall. Cows aren't in stalls; they're in stanchions. I should have known that, but I didn't. So that's actually dealt with in the very first chapter to show that the young man from Connecticut's he knows nothing whatsoever about farming.
Because we talked about the difference between how you balance faith and unrequited love. So my next question then after that is like, how do you then explore the tension between following one's heart and doing what's right for others? How do you explore that tension?
Well, it evolves throughout the book. I mean,
okay,
John Gothier, the main character, would have probably made the mistake and stayed with the women if he could have. But they're kind of the ones who realized, no, this isn't the right thing to do. The woman who's in love with him tells him somewhere in the book, I love my husband. He's the love of my life. You're not. And that's a bit of an awakening for him that even though he loves her, her main love is her husband. She thinks about John Gothier, but she still loves her husband. So I think it's the women who make the right decision. Gothier on his own probably would have made the wrong decision, but they steer him to the right road.
Right. So did John go, as you're writing this, did John go off into a direction that you as the author was not expecting?
Well, actually, it's funny. That's a good question because every single chapter was a chapter I wasn't expecting until about 60% of the book was done. As I said, what I set down to do was write a coming of age story about 5 young men in 7th grade. And I had that all mapped out in my head. But when I changed directions on chapter 2, every single chapter after that, until the whole thing's about 74,000 words to about 50,000 words, I had no idea where the next chapters were going to be. But around the 50,000 word range, now I got it. I know where this is going. I know how it's going to end. So for me, most of the chapters, I think there's 34, 35 chapters, something like that. I would say 20 of the chapters were much a surprise to me as they will be to the reader. The last 15 chapters or so, then I got my bearings. I know where I was going with the story.
So was there any parts of it after you put it together? Talk about the, working with rootstock. How different did the book from your first draft change to the published the published book?
It didn't change the plot much. We did take out one full chapter. I had a chapter on a young boy who's a key player in this play. We did take out one full chapter. The people at Rootstock thought it was unnecessary. And so, yeah, after I read it, I agreed. In fact, my sister, Anne, who's since died since she read it, she was one of my beta readers, and she actually told me to take out that chapter too. So I agreed. So I agreed with Rootstock, and my sister agreed. Otherwise, there weren't a whole lot of changes, honestly. The biggest change was I rewrote the first maybe 2 pages. I added stuff. When the books opened initially, it was a conversation. There's a priest waiting for a boy, and he meets him at the door, and he says, "Do you love Jesus?" And the boy says, "What?" Basically says, "What?" But I added maybe 7, 8 paragraphs to get to that point because it was a bit blunt. I think what Rootstock did for me, which is really good, is they tightened the wordings. They corrected some of when I made mistakes grammatically, and they helped me tighten the prose.
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. Thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. So I'm also, because this being your second novel, like, how did your previous novel to Alice compare to Some Things Aren't Meant to Be in terms of themes and storytelling?
Well, the first novel, called To Alice, is about a home health hospice aide who makes visits 6 different patients. And each of the patients gets their own story. And so she sort of weaves the story together, and we get her story, so it's basically 7 separate stories. It was a little bit easier. That book was a bit easier for me because some of the patients were kind of loosely based on my own family. For example, there's a woman who turns 100 in the book, and the relationship between her and her son in that book very closely resembles the relationship between me and my mother. And one of the characters closely resembles my father. So in some ways, the character development in the first book were much easier. In the second book, the 5 boys are loosely based on my friends and me growing up in Rutland at Immaculate Heart of Mary Church. So that was relatively easy. For example, the stealing of the wine, we all did that. I mean, I don't know any altar boys who didn't. But the other characters, the farm, the John Gothier, the priest, the farmer, the Charles Doty, those characters were totally out of the blue, I guess. So it was a little bit more difficult to develop their characters than it was to develop characters who are based on people I know.
Mm.
And the second book did have a religious part, and that was hard. And the farming part was hard too. Those things I didn't know about. The other book, for the most part, I did work for the VNAs, the visiting nurses, for 33 years. Although I wasn't a caregiver, I did often go on home visits, and several of the characters were based on home visits that I made. So that was a little easier, I guess, although I think I did a better job with the second book. You know, it's like anything else. You play tennis twice, you're better the second time than you were the first time. And so I think this book is tighter. I think it's better written. And I think the characters are more fully developed than in the first book.
So what advice would you give aspiring writers who want to tackle some complex themes like love and faith and morality in their work?
Well, I would say don't tackle the themes like, I'm going to do this theme. Mine evolved. I didn't set out to tackle the theme of why bad things happen to good people. That came from the action. I think if you're going to write any kind of theme, you have to write action that supports it. I don't think if you're just going to do a theme, it's going to sound like a boring sermon. What you need to do is have the characters live through their lives, and through their lives, they deal with the theme, whatever theme you're writing about. Their actions, their lives kind of tell the story. I think you have to tell a story first, and the themes come second. And certainly the themes for me, I didn't realize that I even had themes until I was just about done the book. And the first book was a little bit different. There weren't really so many themes, except for the main theme in the first book is that the home health aide gets too close to her patients. She's I know people know what boundary issues are, but she becomes their patients' friends, and that's never really a good thing to do. She gets too involved with them. So that was the main theme of that book. That one I knew going into it, what the theme of the book was going to be. This book, I bet I was well into the book before I realized where it was going and what themes we were going to tackle.
And so are you working on any new projects now?
Well, I just finished a book. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it. I coached middle school soccer for 25 years, and it's a soccer-based novel. This one I knew the theme into it too. The first book I knew the theme. Second book, no. The third one, the theme is basically adults have turned youth sports into a profession. And there's too many weekends, there's too many activities, too much travel, too much money, too expensive. And basically, people would know, kids would know who've come with families or none with little or no money, or with a big family, but the families simply can't put all the kids into these travel teams. That those kids are, they're sort of on the outside looking in. Now, the main part of the story is a love story between the main character, who's a soccer coach, and a couple of people. One is one of the mothers of one of his players who's divorced, and also one of his longtime friends. So it's sort of the main story is basically a love story, but the theme, if there is one, is sports has gone off the rails a little bit, or at least youth sports, and it's too all-encompassing. It's too expensive, and it's too specialized. People who play soccer generally play 12 months a year and probably don't play much of anything else. People who play basketball probably play 12 months a year. Same with just about every other sport. I think baseball might be the one exception. But how we got to, when I was a kid, and I don't want to sound like an old geezer talking about the good old days, but we played sports just to play. We would meet at the field and we'd play. When was the last time anybody listening to this actually went by a field and saw kids playing a sport without adults on a clipboard with them? It's become an adult-run activity when it used to be just fun. And I'm not criticizing the teams, by the way. Most of the travel teams are wonderful. In fact, I think they all are. They're wonderful. They do a great job. The kids are much more skilled than ever. Soccer kids today are better than my generation by so much. But still, does it make sense for sports to be so engulfing someone's lives? And I don't know. It doesn't have an answer, by the way. There's no answer in this book if it's good or bad, just that it's there. And I think anybody who's has a kid in sports knows that.
Right.
But I don't know what I'm going to do with the book. I'm still thinking. I'm still thinking whether I'll submit it to anybody or not. I don't know.
So are your books in the same universe? Like, would your characters conceivably be able to meet each other?
Well, they all take place in the same town. I call
really?
my town Providence, Vermont. And it's sort of a combination of Rutland and Barrie. And in the second novel, we do Providence, East Providence, and West Providence. And I was thinking Rutland, West Rutland, that kind of thing. So would they know each other? Yeah. In fact, there's a couple of characters that I think are in a couple of the books. But they take in different time periods. The VNA book, or the book about the home health aid, it took place in like 2018, 2019. The second book has just been published. That starts in 1928 as the earliest date, and it goes to 1982. The one that I'm writing in the sports, that's also 2018, 2019. And I do have some of the same characters in that book as I did to Alice. So I'm trying to create a universe of Providence, Vermont. Why I came up with that, I don't know. I just like the sound of it. So like the city on the hill kind of a thing.
So in a way, would you think this soccer one is almost like a sequel to Alice?
I don't know about the sequel. It's something that happens in the same town. Is that a sequel? Not really, because most of the action, the characters, the theme are so much different. I'm just using the same town. It's comfortable. When you know an area, it's easier. I don't think I'm smart enough to create a whole new world. So I created a world I grew up in. In fact, the church in the second novel is pretty much based on the Immaculate Heart of Mary Church, where I grew up in. There's a couple events in there. For example, when I was a kid, there used to be this tunnel that went from the Immaculate Heart of Mary School to the church. It must have been, 70, 80 yards long. It had the heating pipes, and one rite of passage was to sneak through that tunnel to get to the other end. And some boys in the book do that. Of course, they don't do well, but and then I actually wrote a short story that was read at the Bridgeside Halloween event a couple years ago, where I made a humorous story about going through that tunnel. But yeah, that second book, that the parish, is pretty much based on what I grew up in. I wouldn't know how to write any other. Um, I suppose I could do an Episcopal laced
Right.
book, but no, I went to Catholic school for 7 years, and that's sort of, for better or worse, it's kind of made who I am, I guess.
Mm. Now, Peter, if people want to learn more about you and your work, where's the best place they could go to?
Well, the best place would be my webpage, and it's jpetercobb.com. And I've got, they can read the first two chapters of both books. So
Okay.
they can well, if they read them and they don't like them, they can decide not to buy them. Or if they read them and like them, they can buy. Oh, there's the tunnel, and you're showing it on the screen. The
Yep.
tunnel is the humorous story about the kids in the tunnel. But if
Okay.
anybody's interested, they can go on that page. They can read the first two chapters of both books and get an idea whether they like my writing style or not.
Well, Peter, it was great talking to you, and you're gonna have to come back on when you have your soccer book out.
Well, if I did, remember, I haven't decided what I want to do with it. Sometime
Okay.
right now, I'm not as happy with it as I want to be. So I'm not going to submit it anywhere until I'm happy with it.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Peter.
Well, thank you, Barney.
And so, oh, hang on, let me timestamp. This is the best thing about this, Peter, is that the reason why I record these is that I can edit it later and make it sound like
Sure.
I'm asking really good questions. So it makes it
You
sound
are.
like super smooth.